I'm not going to support a lazy fat girl like you, my husband yelled, unaware that I had inherited millions of dollars and was the new owner of the company where he works. Then I decided, do you disgust me? You don't even look like a woman. You look like a burden. The words cut through the dining room like a dull, dirty, rusty knife, the kind of edge that doesn't cut immediately but leaves an open wound, infected with shame. Valeria didn't respond. She couldn't. Her lips were sealed by the trembling of her pride and the habit of remaining silent. She sat with her back straight, her gaze lowered, watching the mashed potatoes cool on her plate. And in front of her, Esteban, her husband of 12 years, was finishing a glass of red wine with an arrogance that was evident even in the sound of the glass hitting the table. Valeria was 38 years old, but she felt twice as old, and her face, still beautiful in the warm light of the dining room, was tired, crisscrossed with small lines that came not from time, but from pain. She had become a mother at 26. Her son Matthias was born with mild cerebral palsy, requiring constant care, therapy, medication, and love. A lot of love. Valeria had given her all to that role, putting aside her dreams, her career in administration, her youth, her friends, her movie nights, her freedom. Her mother, Teresa, sitting in the background in a wheelchair, watched her silently. And she was 66 years old, with a face marked by years of struggle, poverty, and wounded pride. Esteban had never tried it, but over time she'd learned to keep quiet. The same thing again. And Esteban said, wiping his mouth with a napkin, which he then carelessly threw onto his plate. Same thing every day. Purecito, boiled meat, and that face of yours as if you were playing the victim. Valeria swallowed. The lump in her throat hurt more than any blow. She glanced at Matthias, who was in his wheelchair, playing with one of his sensory dolls. And at 11 years old, Matthias didn't talk much, but he understood. He knew. He felt every shout, every slight. I'm tired of you, do you understand? Esteban looked at her, his eyes flashing with rage. Tired of supporting a woman who's not even good enough to warm a plate. Tired of coming home from the office to see this house in disarray. Tired of a mother in a wheelchair who isn't even my mother. Oh, that's enough! Esteban suddenly shouted. Valeria, so loud that even Matthias dropped his toy. Esteban looked at her in surprise, not out of fear, but mockery. Ah, look, in death he was resurrected. Teresa raised a trembling hand. No, in front of the child, please. And why not, Teresa? Esteban stood up, placing his hands on the table. Do you want me to keep playing the understanding husband? The hero? Do you know what they say about me at work? That I'm a poor wretch, that I have to rush home to take care of the dysfunctional family. They've fed me up. Valeria stood up too. The mashed potatoes were still there, untouched, like a metaphor for her life, soft, gray, shapeless. This is how your family shames you. No one's forcing you to stay. And who's gonna keep this house going? Hey, you, the crippled mother, the special child. Don't make me laugh. A thick silence fell over the room. Teresa pressed her lips together until they disappeared. Matthias began to cry silently, big, hot tears falling uncontrollably. And at that moment, Valeria's phone vibrated on the table. She picked it up almost reflexively, grateful for any excuse to escape that hell. Unknown number. She hesitated for a second. She answered, Yes. A slow, formal male voice. Mrs. Valeria Munoz. Yes, it's me. I'm calling on behalf of the notary office of Gonzalez y Sierra. We need you to arrive first thing tomorrow morning. It's regarding the estate of Mr. Armando Ledesma. Valeria frowned. And there must be a mistake. I don't know any Armando Ledesma. And the Lord legally acknowledged her as his daughter before he died. You have been designated the sole heir to his estate. Valeria stared blankly. Esteban was still talking in the background, although she couldn't hear the words anymore. She only heard a buzzing, an electric current running through her body. Her mother, Teresa, stared at her. Her eyes said what her lips couldn't. It's true. She hung up the phone. So what happens now? Esteban asked sarcastically. They called to offer you a job as a professional laundry manager. Valeria looked at him as if she'd just seen him for the first time. He didn't answer. He sat back down. Who was it? Teresa asked in a hoarse voice. A lawyer. They say I inherited something. Something. Who? From Armando Ledesma. Esteban burst out laughing. The owner of Ledesma Corp., the old millionaire who was on the news a few days ago for dying alone. Valeria nodded silently. Or what does he have to do with you? That's what I wonder. Teresa lowered her gaze. A slight tremor in her hands betrayed her. Mom, do you know something? This isn't the time. Yes, it is. Esteban banged the table. Is someone going to explain to me what's going on? Matias began to cough, choking on his own tears. Valeria ran to him, held him tightly, cradled him against her chest. Calm down, my love. Mom is here. Mom isn't leaving. Esteban took his plate and smashed it on the floor. I'm fed up with you. Fed up with this farce, this house, this life. I'm not going to support a fat, lazy woman like you. The silence was immediate, dense, absolute. Valeria turned slowly. Teresa was breathing heavily. Matias looked at her as if waiting for something, a word, a gesture, a sign. But Valeria just smiled. Small, tiny, a curl of her lips that no one understood, but that changed everything. You're right, she said without emotion. You're not going to keep me anymore. Esteban blinked. What did you say? I'm leaving tomorrow. You keep your food, your ego, and your silence. Where are you going? Valeria looked at her mother, then at her son. Where can I breathe? And without another word, she picked Matias up in her arms and went upstairs. Esteban stood there with the remains of his plate on the floor, with wine spilled on the tablecloth, and with a silence that for the first time didn't obey him. Teresa looked at him from the corner. I swear, one day you'll pay for everything. He snorted. You too now. They're all crazy in this house. And she turned her head toward the window. The neighborhood lights flickered. Somewhere the city was still alive, oblivious to the daily tragedy that occurred in that house. In her room, Valeria was packing a bag with Matias's clothes, medical papers, and her old university notebook. At the bottom of the closet, she found a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were her certificates, her diploma in business administration, the letters she never sent, her first perfume, and a crumpled photo of Renzo, her childhood friend and her hidden love. She caressed it with her fingers. And she didn't cry. It wasn't broken. She was waking up. Downstairs, Esteban was lighting another cigarette. He didn't know he'd just signed his own death sentence. He didn't know that the woman he'd scorned was now the owner of the empire he believed he ruled. And for the first time in a long time, she had a plan. That night, she didn't sleep. While the world around her plunged into darkness, Valeria prepared the essentials. Matias's medical records, her own university transcript, the old diary where she'd once jotted down her dreams, and the same ones she'd put on hold since motherhood, marriage, and reality chained her to a life she hadn't chosen. At 5:00 a.m. sharp, she quietly went down the stairs with a suitcase in each hand and Matias asleep in her arms. Her mother waited silently at the door, a blanket draped over her legs, her eyes moist. Valeria nodded. Teresa knew it was time. They called a taxi using their cell phone app, and when the car pulled up in front of the house, they didn't look back. Esteban slept soundly with the television on, an empty bottle of wine beside the bed, and the false certainty that he had won. He didn't know that the only thing he had lost that night was the only thing that had ever sustained him. Valeria rented a small apartment in a suburban neighborhood, simple but clean. 3 cramped rooms, a bathroom with no hot water, damp walls, but a window from which a glimpse of the sky could be seen, free of electrical wires. It was enough. Teresa was the first to break the silence. Are you going to tell me what this Ledesma guy has to do with you? Valeria looked at her from the kitchen doorway, where she was heating some water to make powdered milk for Matias. And it's true. Is what the lawyer said true? Teresa lowered her gaze, and the trembling in her hands wasn't from the cold. I was very young, 19 years old. I worked as a secretary in an office. Your biological father was the owner of that company. His name was Armando. He was married, and I was a fool. Valeria felt a chill run down her spine. He abandoned me. He asked me to have an abortion. I didn't want it. He fired me. He never came back to look for me, but his wife died years later, and it seems that with his guilt came remorse. He investigated, found you, and recently recognized you legally. He didn't want you to know while he was alive, which is why his will is so peculiar." Valeria closed her eyes for a moment. "And my real father was a millionaire, one of the richest men in the country, owner of Edie's McCormick." The name now held a different meaning. Ledesma Corp. was a technology and infrastructure company with hundreds of employees, government contracts, and offices in several countries, a powerhouse. And now, according to that lawyer, she was the sole heir. But it wasn't the wealth that kept her awake, but the fact that Esteban worked there, in that company, in that empire she had just inherited. For the next few weeks, Valeria moved in silence. She began therapy with a psychologist named Gabriela, a specialist in women victims of emotional abuse, and she exercised at home, ate better. She learned to breathe before answering, to say no without fear, to recognize herself in the mirror without shame. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy, but with each passing day, the face reflected back at him was more his own, less foreign, less molded by Esteban. Matias enrolled in a new physical therapy clinic. Thanks to the resources he'd inherited, he could pay for his sessions without depending on anyone. His smile improved. He began to make sounds he hadn't made in years. And although he couldn't articulate complete words, every time he looked at his mother, his eyes said what his mouth still couldn't. "Thank you, Teresa." From the chair by the window, she knitted in silence. She no longer needed to speak. She knew the change was happening and that it was real. One morning, Edisme Corp's lawyer sent a package by courier. Inside were legal documents, deeds, company shares, and a handwritten letter signed by Armando Ledesma. "I failed you as a father, but I return to you the power that was always yours, not so that you can forgive me, but so that you can decide what to do with my name." Valeria didn't cry. She didn't feel nostalgia. She felt direction. She requested a meeting with the management of Lades M. Corps. It was Renzo who arranged it. Renzo, her childhood friend, the only one who didn't disappear when things got tough, appeared at the apartment door with a box of fresh fruit and a nervous smile. "I can come in." Valeria let him in without saying anything. "I heard about Armando," he said. "I found out from a colleague. Ledesma had a secret daughter, a future heir. When I heard your name, I didn't believe it. Now you know. What are you planning to do?" "What no one ever did to me, bring justice." Renzo was a financial analyst, but also an honest, loyal man, one of those who never got bogged down in the mud, even though everyone around him did. And he was the one who revealed that Esteban worked in the projects area, that he was rapidly climbing the corporate ladder, that there were rumors he was being considered for operations management, a position with access to multi-million-dollar contracts, all thanks to inflated reports, data manipulation, and an enviable ability to pretend he knew more than he actually did. And something more. "He's in a relationship with Juliana," Renzo said, looking down at the floor. "She's new, a recent graduate, pretty, smart, and spends all her time in her office." Valeria didn't blink. "Since when?" "About 6 months, maybe more." "How do you know?" "I've seen photos, conversations. I've heard him bragging at a meeting. He brags about what he has, about what's missing in his house. He calls you a burden. Ballast." Valeria clenched her fists. Not out of anger, out of strength. "I want to join the company, not as president, not yet. And I want to see who's who at the bottom. I want to meet the people who work there, the ones Esteban tramples on, the ones no one sees." Renzo helped her arrange discreet visits. She introduced herself as an external personnel evaluation consultant under an alternative name. She went to the headquarters, toured offices, spoke with cleaning staff, technicians, and receptionists. No one knew who she really was, not even Juliana, who greeted her with a polite smile, unaware that she was standing before her, the legitimate wife of the man she slept with in the afternoons. Esteban didn't see her. Oh, if he did see her, he didn't recognize her. She had gained a little weight, yes, but her clothes were different. Her posture had changed. She was no longer the woman hunched over with guilt. Now she was a confident figure, with fair words and heavy silences. On her second visit, an employee took her to the project area. There he was, on a blackboard, explaining a supposed savings in materials that no one understood, but everyone pretended to. "As you can see," he said, "we managed to reduce concrete costs by 27% thanks to a clever redistribution of the foundations. We're pure efficiency." Valeria stood in the shadows behind a column, watching. She listened to him speak, and he used bombastic language, confusing statistics, and a condescending tone. He felt powerful. A manager, engineer Marco Lucetti, recognized her not by her face, but by her name on her security clearance. "Excuse me, are you the new president?" "Not yet," Valeria replied. "For now, I'm just an observer." Lucetti swallowed, understood, and said nothing more. At the end of the day, Valeria was invited to an internal performance review meeting. Renzo accompanied her. He sat at the back, behind tinted glass in a room adjacent to the main hall. No one knew he was there. Esteban entered first, and he wore an expensive suit, strong perfume, and a rehearsed smile. He greeted everyone with backslapping, empty laughter, and false promises. "Today we're going to present the quarterly results," he said, as he connected his laptop to the projector. "Oh, I think everyone will be impressed." Valeria looked at him silently. It wasn't anger she felt. It was a shame because everything he thought he had wasn't his. It was borrowed, stolen, fake. While Esteban spoke, Valeria opened her notebook and wrote a single sentence. "He has no idea." And she smiled, not mockingly, but with certainty, because at that moment she understood that true power wasn't in shouting or banging the table or humiliating. True power lay in knowing who you are and who you never need to be again. Valeria firmly closed her notebook, and the murmur of the meeting continued to float behind the tinted glass as Esteban, with his fake charisma, continued to show off in front of the executives, unaware that his days were numbered. She didn't need to interrupt. No, she didn't need to humiliate him in front of everyone yet. And she wouldn't let him fall yet with the same lies he'd planted. She left the room without saying a word. Renzo followed her, his expression a mixture of concern and pride. In the elevator, she didn't speak. She just stared at their reflection in the steel mirror, and two figures that were once fragments and were now beginning to come together. When they reached the parking lot, she broke the silence. "I want all the contracts from the last 6 months reviewed. I need an internal audit team, one that isn't contaminated. Do you have anyone in mind?" "Yes. And I want them in this week. His name is Samuel." Renzo raised an eyebrow. "Samuel, Doña Leonor's son, the boy who has Asperger's. Yes, I met him at the clinic where Matthias is taken. I helped him organize therapy games, memorizing schedules, names, codes. He has a brilliant mind. They need him, even if they don't know it." Renzo didn't object. I'd already learned that when Valeria made decisions like this, it was always for a deeper reason. The next day, Samuel arrived with a worn backpack, poorly sewn shoes, and a shirt that was too big for him. And he walked with his head down, talking to himself in a very low voice. But when he entered the office assigned to him with Valeria, everything changed. His gaze fixed on the computer as if it were a musical instrument, and in less than 20 minutes, he had already detected minor inconsistencies in 3 billing documents. Valeria watched him with interest as he explained his color-coding system. "Every file has a pattern. When they break that pattern, I know there's a mistake or a lie. And how do you distinguish one from the other?" Samuel looked at her directly, as if that question didn't need an answer. "Lies have a smell." And he returned to his screen. In parallel, Valeria's orders began to be implemented. All administrative areas underwent cross-checks. Sick leaves, off-duty leave, and technical reports were reviewed. Esteban began to notice the change, but he interpreted it as part of a typical transition process when a new president takes office. What he didn't know was that the president was already there among them, disguised as a shadow, a protocol, a familiar face yet to reveal itself. It was Samuel who detected the first sign of serious irregularity, an email filed in a hidden folder within the shared project system. And in that email, Esteban exchanged messages with an external supplier called Trenox Solutions, which was not listed in the official database of approved contractors. Attached were modified plans of public structures along with inflated expense figures. Samuel shared the information with Valeria without a word, with only a small post-it note that read, "Doesn't match." Valeria read it and realized that Trenox wasn't just a phantom supplier, but was being used to launder money. Esteban had been diverting funds for longer than she imagined. Meanwhile, Juliana kept appearing in Esteban's office visit logs outside of business hours. Always after 6 p.m., always with envelopes in her hand, always with a perfume so strong it permeated the air, even after she was gone. Valeria watched her one of those nights from a security camera. Juliana sat on Esteban's lap. He stroked her leg. She laughed with a rehearsed flirtatiousness, but her gaze drifted off into something darker every second. Something didn't fit. Days later, Juliana requested a private meeting with Human Resources. She complained of stress, anxiety, and morning sickness. The department director gave her a cold, concise report. She requested a temporary leave of absence, saying she needed to take some tests. Valeria didn't react publicly, but she called Renzo as soon as she had a moment alone. "She's pregnant." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. And she won't say who the father is." That same night, Teresa had an episode. Valeria arrived at the apartment and found her mother semi-conscious, breathing slowly, and with a fever that burned her forehead. They took her to the nearest hospital, and the diagnosis was a respiratory infection complicated by her age and chronic condition. While the doctors stabilized her, Valeria sat next to Matthias in the waiting room. The boy stroked his sensory doll without taking his eyes off the floor. Valeria took his hand. "I promise you, Grandma's going to be okay." Matthias didn't respond, but he held her hand tightly. Valeria couldn't help but cry. Everything she was building could collapse at any moment. Power couldn't buy time or reverse the damage accumulated by years of silence. And the next morning, while Teresa slept, hooked up to an IV, Valeria returned to the office. Samuel was waiting with another report. This time it was a recording. He didn't know it was on, he explained, showing him his voice recorder, which he used to record his jumbled thoughts. He played the audio. Esteban was talking to someone else, someone who didn't identify themselves, but the tone was clear. Information peddling, leaks, promises of under-the-table payments, and more. "If the board doesn't approve my promotion, I'll do what we agreed on. I have the information and a press contact." Valeria closed her eyes. Esteban was blackmailing the higher-ups. He was prepared to bring down the company if he didn't get what he wanted, like a child who breaks a toy when it's not allowed to be taken. Later, while Valeria was processing everything, Renzo approached with a folder, and the list of employees reported for harassment in recent months. No formal action was taken. The victims were afraid. "Esteban, there are 5 mentions of his name, all dismissed without investigation. 4 women, 1 man." Valeria swallowed. She knew what he was capable of, and she had experienced it, but reading about it in the reports, feeling it so close, made her nauseous. That night, Renzo invited her to dinner, not in an expensive restaurant, but in a small inn facing a square. They ordered empanadas and hot soup. They spoke little, ate in silence until Renzo broke through the wall. "Why don't you hate me? And what makes you think I don't? Because you still let me be around after what happened with Juliana." Valeria looked at him for a long time, then lowered her gaze. "Because I know what it feels like to make mistakes out of loneliness. I'm not excusing you, but I understand. I don't want you to understand me. I want you to believe me." "What do you believe?" "What? What do I care about you?" Valeria didn't respond. She finished her soup in silence. And the next day, Juliana showed up at the local gynecology clinic. Matthias had therapy there. Valeria didn't see her, but Samuel did. He recognized her from a photo Renzo had shown him, and she wasn't alone. Renzo was with her. Samuel, unaware that what he was doing was dangerous, took a photo with his cell phone and sent it to Valeria with a single word. "Today." Valeria stared at the image for several seconds. Renzo next to Juliana in a waiting room, his arm draped over the back of the chair, her face serious. Nothing in the photo confirmed anything, but it didn't deny it either. She stood still. She felt her whole body tense. Juliana was pregnant. Renzo was with her. And what if the child wasn't Esteban's? And what if everything was more complicated than it seemed? And if betrayal came from where she least expected it? The clock struck 6 p.m. The city was beginning to light up. Valeria, from her office window, looked at the city's tall buildings and repeated to herself a phrase she already knew by heart. "All the trap has already been set. All that's left is for everyone to take the wrong step." Aria left her phone on the table. The image remained etched in her retina like an oil stain that refuses to go away. Renzo in a medical waiting room next to Juliana. She with a slightly bulging belly. He sitting too close. Not a caress, not a smile, but the complicity was there, invisible to those who can't read glances. Valeria knew. He knew it all too well. The silence in the office became dense, almost physical. Samuel, at his desk, pretended to review papers, but his eyes trembled. He had noticed the change in Valeria's expression, that sudden tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the edge of the desk. He didn't dare speak. Valeria took a deep breath. She counted to 5. Then she stood up, grabbed her bag, left the pile of documents, and left the building without looking at anyone. The cold night air hit her face like a reproach. She walked 3 blocks to an empty cafe. She ordered a coffee, sat down at the farthest table, and thought about the unthinkable. What if Renzo had lied? What if the child Juliana was expecting wasn't Esteban's but his? What if the only man she had left clean was also rotten inside? It wasn't just jealousy. It wasn't hurt pride. It was something else. It was the feeling that every person she touched betrayed her. First her mother, by hiding who her real father was. Then Esteban, with years of humiliation. Now maybe Renzo. They had all hurt her. Everyone except Matias. Her phone vibrated in her purse. She checked the screen. It was the clinic. She answered immediately. "Mrs. Munoz." "Yes, tell me." You need to come. Your son has had a respiratory crisis. He's under observation, but we need your consent to transfer him to the pediatric emergency room." The world shrank, and she left the coffee untouched and ran to the main avenue to hail a taxi. She didn't remember how she got there, and she didn't remember the traffic lights or the lights. She only remembered getting out of the car, running down the hospital hallway, opening the door to the observation area, and seeing him there, so small with an oxygen mask, his lips purple, his body still. "Matias," she whispered, approaching. And a young doctor explained that the child had entered a state of mild hypoxia, probably due to undetected fibrosis. They performed a CT scan, a battery of tests, and lung function studies. Valeria didn't fully understand the terms, but the important words were clear. Europe. Experimental treatment. Expensive. Immediate. Salvation or resignation. How much does it cost? More than can be paid without institutional support. Valeria looked him in the eye. "I can pay for it. Are you sure?" I didn't hesitate. Matias was stabilized, but he had to travel soon. Treatment had to begin before the fibrosis spread to other areas. Valeria spent the night in an armchair next to his bed. At dawn, when the boy opened his eyes, the first thing he said was, "Mom, why doesn't Dad love me?" The question was like a gunshot. Valeria froze. Matias wasn't looking at her directly. He was staring at the ceiling, his lips dry, his voice barely audible. Valeria felt the air escape from her chest. "It's not that I don't love you," he whispered. "It's that he doesn't know how to. I did something wrong." "No, my love. You're perfect. And the problem is his, not yours. And why doesn't she live with us? Because I didn't want him around. Because you and I are better off without anyone hurting us." Matias closed his eyes again. A tear slowly ran down his cheek. Valeria wiped it away with her fingers. She felt powerless, furious, hurt. And the child she had defended with all her being now asked her if he was guilty of not being loved. And all because that despicable man hadn't been able to understand what was right before his eyes. The next morning, Teresa went to the hospital. They wheeled her in, pale, her eyelids drooping, her voice hoarse. Valeria explained the situation to her. She nodded without speaking. She was thinner. Her skin had dark spots. A cough shook her entire body. When Matias fell asleep, Valeria took her to the hospital cafeteria. There, while stirring sugar in a cup of tea, Teresa spoke. "You hate me for keeping it from you." Valeria didn't reply. "I understood as soon as you said his name. I knew sooner or later the truth would come out. He wasn't just a man, he was a whole life. You took away my chance to know who he was." I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to protect you. What? What? And from turning you into a copy of him. Valeria looked up. What do you mean? Your father wasn't just a coward, he was cruel. He didn't just fire me, he threatened me. He told me that if I spoke, he'd erase my name from the world. He had connections, money, power. You were a stain on his record, and yet he left me his fortune. Because guilt can't be erased, it only transforms. He gave you the money he didn't want to give you in life, but don't mistake it for love. Valeria swallowed. There was a tangle in her chest that she didn't know how to unravel. Teresa was trembling. He splashed his fingers on hers. I don't have much left, she whispered. I know. I feel it in my body, and I don't want to leave without telling you this. If you ever have to choose between revenge and love, choose love, because revenge doesn't fill, it doesn't heal, it only delays the emptiness. Valeria looked at her for a long time. The image of Renzo returned to her mind. Juliana was pregnant. She felt doubt, pain, and anger. That night, when she returned to the apartment, she found an envelope under the door. There was no return address. She opened it with cold hands. Inside were photos. Esteban was meeting with a group of men in a discreet office. She recognized one of them, Pedro Lara Rain. He's a partner at Lades Macor, expelled years ago for embezzlement. Another was a lawyer with a record for money laundering. The third, the same Trenox Solutions contact. Esteban selling secrets. Esteban allying himself with the company's enemies. Esteban willing to do anything for more power. And it was the next day that Samuel found the rest. On a USB drive left in the printing room, recordings, notes, and a video. In it, Esteban spoke directly to the camera. This is insurance in case I'm left out. I have a copy of the bidding documents, the names of the ghost employees, the transfer dates. If they take me out of the game, we're all down. Valeria locked the USB in a safe. Then she locked herself in the bathroom in front of the mirror and stared at herself for a long time. She had it all in her hands. Saw the evidence, the power, the opportunity to destroy him, and yet something inside her trembled. She brought her hands to her face, leaned against the sink, and slowly sank to the floor. She wept silently, with a sadness that came not only from betrayal, but from loss, because every step toward justice took her away from something she also needed, peace. And amidst her tears, she asked herself in a low voice, so low that only her reflection heard her. What if I become like him? Arya asked without waiting for an answer, while the silence of the bathroom grew heavier than her own body curled up on the floor. The dried tears left marks on her skin. She wasn't crying out of rage, she was crying out of exhaustion, out of disappointment, out of that strange mix of justice and guilt that ate away at her chest. She'd come so far, she had everything, and yet something inside her was still emptying her. And she stood up slowly, washed her face with cold water, and looked at herself in the mirror again. This time the question dissipated. He wasn't like him because he had the power to crush, but also the ability to decide how to use it. That night he didn't sleep. He wrote a list with dates, documents, names, recordings. The puzzle was complete. Esteban had not only betrayed his family, he had also corrupted the place that fed hundreds of workers. He had manipulated reports, threatened employees, covered up abuses, and now he was preparing to sell the EDESM Corpa database to international competitors. Valeria couldn't keep quiet any longer. At dawn, she gathered the company's legal team, and she demanded an urgent meeting of all employees and managers, an in-person general meeting in the main auditorium, not a single empty seat. What was about to happen there wasn't a simple announcement. It was the fall of an empire built on lies. At 10 o'clock a.m., the lights in the auditorium dimmed. More than 300 people were seated, murmuring to each other. No one knew for sure what was happening, but the atmosphere smelled of something imminent. Rumors were rife that there would be layoffs, that a merger was imminent, that a new president would finally appear. Esteban arrived dressed as if he owned the world. New suit, silk tie, and a cocky smile. He greeted several people with backslapping gestures, sat in the front row, and cheekily crossed his legs. He had no idea what was about to happen. Renzo was in the sound control room. Samuel, sitting next to the stage, held a small folded sheet of paper in his hands. Teresa wasn't there. The hospital had decided to admit her as a precaution, although her condition was worsening every day. Valeria took the stage amid murmurs. She was wearing a plain black outfit. Her face was serene, not a drop of makeup, not a smile. She held the microphone firmly. "Good morning. I officially introduce myself to you. My name is Valeria Muñoz Ledesma. I am the president of this company." There was a stunned silence. A few gasped. Others turned to Esteban, whose face was now as rigid as marble. A whisper spread like wildfire through the auditorium. Valeria continued without pause. "Over the past few weeks, I've been observing the inner workings of the company, not as president, but as one of its members. From the inside, I've walked its halls, reviewed files, listened to conversations, and what I discovered compels me to speak before you today with proof, with truth, and with consequences." She gestured to Renzo. The first video appeared on the auditorium's giant screen. Esteban negotiating with the illegal supplier, receiving envelopes, laughing as he explained how to inflate budgets. Then came the recording of the threat to the Jumpa. "If they take me out of the game, we're all down." Later, a chain of emails demonstrated the use of fake identities to justify non-existent overtime. Faces transformed as the evidence appeared. Some employees covered their mouths with their hands, others desperately took notes. And no one spoke. No one dared. Valeria walked across the stage as if each step were an act of liberation. "And it doesn't end there," she said in a firm voice. Mr. Esteban Herrera was also accused of harassing multiple employees. These complaints were ignored out of fear, manipulation, or protection. "Those people will have their voice today." He paused. He looked directly at Esteban, who was now as white as a sheet, sweating and clenching his fists on his knees. "What you built with lies today crumbles with the truth." Esteban stood up abruptly. "Don't do this to me, Valeria." "No, here." Valeria didn't look away. "Not here." "So where? At home? In bed? Where did you lie? At work? Where did you steal?" Esteban climbed onto the stage and tried to snatch the microphone away. Renzo intervened. 2 security agents grabbed him by the arms. "You're nothing without me. I picked you up from the trash. I made you a woman." Samuel got up from his seat. He walked slowly over to where Valeria and Esteban were. He held the folded sheet of paper between his fingers. He handed it to Esteban without saying anything. Then he returned to his place. Esteban, confused, opened the paper. He read silently. "What you did hurt me. You called me weird. You said I was a nuisance, but I found someone who believes in me. You don't deserve to destroy what she's building." Esteban dropped the letter. The room erupted in murmurs again. Some applauded, others recorded with their phones. Valeria took the microphone one last time. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning of a clean, fair, and humane place. And to achieve that, corruption must go, cruelty must go, and you, Esteban, must go." The officers escorted him to the exit, and no one said goodbye. No one approached. Juliana, in the back row, lowered her head. When Esteban disappeared through the door, Valeria looked at Juliana. "Before closing this meeting, there's something else that needs to be said." Juliana stood up. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She walked to the stage and took the microphone with icy fingers. "I'm pregnant, and everyone thought it was Esteban's. It isn't." There was a collective sigh. "The father is Renzo." Valeria lowered her eyelids. There was no anger. There was no scandal. Just a knot that slowly unraveled as if she already knew. Renzo closed his eyes. Juliana handed over the microphone and left without looking at anyone. Her heels pounded like war drums on the auditorium floor. She was the last to leave. As she left the building, Valeria saw it was raining, and the drops pounded violently against the asphalt. In the distance, a figure walked slowly in the rain. It was Esteban, alone, without an umbrella, his suit soaked, his gaze lost. Valeria followed him for a few meters. He nodded nearby and stopped. "Are you here to make fun of me?" "No, to tell me I deserve it either." Then Valeria stood in front of him. She looked him straight in the eyes. It was never about revenge, it was about justice. Valeria left that phrase hanging in the air like a door closing softly, silently. but with a weight that's never forgotten. Esteban didn't respond. He stood there in the rain, soaked, his arms drooping and his face drawn, like an old building whose foundations have just been torn away. Valeria didn't look at him again, turned around, and walked off without haste, with the serenity of someone who has finally buried a corpse she'd been carrying on her back for years. The following days passed between heavy silences and decisive actions. Valeria didn't take refuge in triumph, didn't let herself be intoxicated by public glory. Instead, she sat alone in her office, drafted a letter, and called a meeting with the company's senior members. "I'm going to found a special program," she announced, "and a support network for single mothers, children with disabilities, and vulnerable employees. It will be called the Matias Project." The room fell silent. Some exchanged surprised glances. No one expected it. What everyone expected was that the new president would clean up the company, fire a few people, and focus on investments, not that she would create a social arm from the ashes of an internal war. Valeria didn't ask for their opinions, only clear instructions: automatic donations from her salary, funds earmarked for scholarships, expanded medical coverage, and partnerships with clinics. And in less than 2 weeks, Proyecto Matias had a headquarters, an operational team, and dozens of beneficiaries. Samuel was appointed technical coordinator of the project. He earned the title without asking for it. His dedication, his precision, his humanity made him indispensable. Valeria gave him carte blanche to select personnel. The young man walked with more confidence. He no longer lowered his gaze so much. He spoke in longer sentences, although he still remained silent when he felt words weren't enough. One morning, while returning from the supermarket with a bag in his hand, Samuel stopped when he saw a man lying on the corner of an alley. He was wearing a torn coat, his hands dirty, his hair disheveled. As he drew closer, he recognized the face. It was Esteban, and he was sitting on wet cardboard, trembling, his gaze lost in thought. Samuel hesitated for a moment. Then he took a cereal bar out of his backpack and offered it to him. "I don't have any money," he said in his soft voice, "but this might help you." Esteban looked at him, and for the first time in years, he really looked at him, not with condescension, not with sarcasm. He looked at him like someone who recognizes they've hit rock bottom. He grabbed the bar with trembling hands, then covered his face with both hands and began to cry. And it wasn't a cry of rage. It sounded like shame, defeat, pure regret. Samuel stood there for a few seconds, then walked away in silence, without looking back. He never said anything about it to Valeria. Meanwhile, Juliana had resigned from the company. She left a brief letter with no complaints, and she moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. She didn't ask for help. She didn't contact Renzo, nor Valeria. She started working in a neighborhood bookstore selling novels and school notebooks. She was 7 months pregnant. One Friday afternoon, Renzo came to see her, and he was carrying a box of baby clothes. He knocked on the door. Juliana opened it and didn't seem surprised. "Hi," he said, his eyes lowered. "Come in if you want." Renzo entered. The place was modest but clean. It smelled of hot soup. In one corner, a rocking chair. On the wall, a framed photograph of an open field. "I didn't come to complain," he said. "I just wanted to know how you're doing." "I'm learning," she replied. "It wasn't easy, but I'm fine." "Oh, do you need anything?" "I'm fine, and I don't want to depend on you. I don't want you to think I was looking for anything more than a mistake." Renzo lowered his head. "It should never have happened." "It happened," Juliana said without rancor, "and from that night, this was born. A life. I'm not asking you to be a father if you don't want to, but I'm not going to hide it either." Renzo left the box on the table. "I'm not ready. I don't know if I'll ever be, but I'm not going to leave completely." Juliana nodded. There were no more words. There were no tears, and it was the end of something that never started quite right. That night, Renzo went to see Valeria. She was in her office signing documents. She didn't look at him when he came in. "Have you come to give me another piece of news?" Renzo sat down across from her. His face was tense. "I'm not here to justify myself. I know I failed, that I failed you when you most needed to trust." Valeria put down her pen. She looked at him with tired eyes. Why? because it was broken, because I confused tenderness with escape, because I was weak. And while you were confusing things, I was rebuilding myself piece by piece. And I know. And now what do you want? Sorry. And no. I just wanted to look you in the eyes and tell you that despite everything, I admire you. And then if one day I can earn a place in your life again, even if it's as someone you don't hate, I'll be there. Valeria remained silent, then nodded slightly. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, but I don't want to live hating you. Renzo smiled sadly. That's more than I deserve. Before leaving, he placed a folder on the desk. It's the project for the public hospital you mentioned. It's ready. All that was missing was your signature. Valeria skimmed it without saying anything. A week later, she called a press conference, and she announced the donation of $1 million to the San Benito General Hospital. The funds would be used to remodel the pediatrics department, purchase state-of-the-art equipment, and create a specialized unit for rare childhood diseases. It's not charity, she concluded. It's social justice. It's giving back what the world has taken from so many of us, and I do it in the name of my son, Matthias. That same day, Matthias was taken to the airport along with a medical team. His treatment in Europe had already been coordinated. Valeria traveled with him. Samuel stayed on as temporary project manager. Teresa, due to her delicate condition, remained in the hospital. The treatment started well. During the first few days, Matthias responded positively. Valeria accompanied him to each session, and she read him stories, sang to him, and talked to him about the sea. The boy smiled, albeit weakly, with that tenderness that only children can give. But in the second week, things changed. A high fever, unsteady pulse, and labored breathing. The doctors took urgent measures. And the fibrosis had spread more than expected. The treatment was aggressive. Her small, tired body couldn't hold up. Valeria spent the night awake. At dawn, a doctor came in, his face grave. We have to induce a medical coma. It's the only way to prevent further damage. If we don't, he could collapse. Valeria pressed her lips together, nodding with tears in her eyes. Before they released him, she leaned over him. I love you, my love. You're going to rest a little. When you wake up, I'll be here as always. Matthias looked at her tiredly and said in a faint voice, Are you going to sing to me when I wake up? Valeria nodded. Yes, my love. I'll sing to you every day if necessary. The boy closed his eyes. The monitor displayed a slow, steady heart rate. The doctors worked in silence. Valeria remained motionless in the chair, like a statue bleeding from the inside. Matthias had fallen into a coma, and with him a part of her. And so, while the world continued to turn, Valeria felt her soul finally bleeding without hiding, because justice isn't celebrated, it's sustained, and sometimes it's paid for with what hurts the most. The room where Matthias slept in a coma was filled with machines breathing for him, and the constant hum of the monitor, the high-pitched beep of each heartbeat, the artificial respiration marking the rhythm of his struggle. Valeria didn't move. She had grown accustomed to the pain of seeing her son not moving, not laughing, not uttering those few words that always filled her day. Every second she spent in that room was a constant decision not to collapse. The medical staff was careful. They treated her with a mixture of respect and compassion, but no one could tell her what she most wanted to hear, that her son would return. Not with certainty, not with guarantees, only with hope. And hope at that moment was a thin line that broke with each piece of bad news. That morning, while Valeria was wetting Matthias's lips with gauze, she received a call from his lawyer. Esteban had been admitted to the municipal hospital with severe pneumonia. They found him unconscious in a public street, malnourished, suffering from hypothermia. No family member came to look for him. No one knew where he lived. Valeria hung up without saying much. Hours passed, and she thought about it. She thought about it again until she finally grabbed a folder, a handwritten letter, and left the hospital where Matthias was sleeping, his soul still suspended. The municipal hospital smelled of cheap disinfectant. The room where Esteban was recovering was at the end of a windowless hallway. He was awake, but gaunt. His beard was thick, his eyes sunken, his skin gray. When he saw her enter, he sat up awkwardly, with a hint of shame in his expression. "What are you doing here?" Valeria didn't respond. and she took a folded sheet of paper out of her bag and placed it on the nightstand. "It's a letter from Matthias. He wrote it before his trip. He left it for you in case something happened." Esteban swallowed. "He's in a coma," she said without hesitation, fighting as always. Esteban said nothing. He took the sheet of paper with trembling fingers, opened it, and recognized his son's messy handwriting. As he read, tears began to slide down his cheeks uncontrollably. When he finished, he held the book to his chest as if it were a shield or a confession. Valeria watched him in silence, and she felt no hatred, only a distant echo of compassion, of sorrow for what could never be. "What you did cannot be fixed," she said without harshness. "But can you start over?" "Not with me, not with Matthias, with you." He left the room without waiting for a reply. That same afternoon, as the European sky clouded over behind the hospital windows, the monitor next to Matthias's bed emitted a different sound, faint, a change in rhythm. The doctors came in immediately. Valeria approached as if every step cost her soul, and then she saw him. His fingers moved, then his eyelids. Slowly, with tremendous effort, Matthias opened his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. It was as if the world had turned on again. Valeria fell to her knees beside the bed, crying, kissing his hands, repeating his name like a prayer. The doctor smiled discreetly at her. Matthias looked at her as if he knew she had come back from far away just for him. "Are you going to sing to me?" he asked weakly. "Of course, darling," Valeria said. "A lifetime if you want." They returned home weeks later. The treatment had paid off. Matthias was stronger. He didn't run or scream like the other children, but he was alive, and that was enough. Upon her return, Valeria was greeted as a symbol of strength, but she no longer wanted that place. She didn't want to be the woman on the pedestal. She had seen too much, felt too much. As she publicly resigned as president of Edis McCorp, he did it without applause, without long speeches. He simply said, "I didn't come to stay in power. I came to clean up a man, to protect a life, and I've done that." The board of directors accepted his decision with respect. Samuel was promoted to general coordinator of the Matthias project. His intelligence, his sensitivity, his sense of duty made him perfect for leading the social area. Soon after, an international organization invited him to give a TED Talk at the company's headquarters, and on the day of the event, the auditorium was packed. Samuel took the stage with a notebook in his hand, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "When I was a kid, I was told I was weird, that I talked too much to myself, that I had the wrong look, that I didn't fit in, and that hurt me a lot until I met someone who didn't ask me to fit in, who gave me space to be who I am. That person taught me that respect isn't an option, it's a human need. Today, I'm here to tell you something simple. When you respect someone, you are sowing the future, because where there is respect, the possibility of a better life is born." The audience applauded. Some were crying. Valeria, from the back row, felt something inside her also heal. Renzo, for his part, had returned to work as an independent consultant. He maintained contact with Valeria, but without intruding. Their relationship transformed into a friendly distance. Juliana gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Gabriel. Renzo visited him, cared for him, and held him with clumsy but sincere hands. Juliana never demanded anything of him. They raised the child peacefully, without drama, without unnecessary titles. Doña Teresa, on the other hand, didn't last long. Her already fragile body slowly withered away. Valeria was with her until her last breath. At her bedside, her mother took her hand and whispered, "Thank you for being stronger than me." Valeria could only tell her she loved her, and watched her go with the peace she hadn't had in life. Days after the funeral, while organizing her mother's belongings, she found a closed box with a letter inside. It was addressed to her. She read it sitting in front of the window with the sun streaming through the curtains. "Dear daughter, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't apologize for what I hid. I only leave you with my gratitude, because you did what I couldn't, because you took the pain and turned it into something worthwhile, because you chose to love, even when you could destroy. Don't inherit my fear. Inherit your own light." Valeria closed the letter with trembling hands. She no longer needed more answers or explanations. What she had was enough. What was left was her life. She moved near the sea. In a simple house with large windows and a porch where Matthias played with his sensory toys. There he wrote, cooked, and walked. No one recognized her, no one applauded her, and that made her happy. One morning, Matthias brought her an old notebook, opened it, and showed her a page written in clumsy but determined handwriting. It was a diary. "You wrote this." The boy nodded. Valeria read it aloud. "My mom isn't a lazy fatso. She's the bravest woman in the world." Her voice cracked. She hugged him tightly, tenderly, with everything she had, and she knew in that instant that it had all been worth it. Because forgiving isn't forgetting, it's freeing yourself from the person who hurt you. And so, in a corner of the world where the sea sings instead of screaming, where silence doesn't hurt but embraces, light was finally born. What did you think of this story? Many people are experiencing similar situations. We hope the voice of joy lives on in your heart as well. If this story moved you, share it. Be part of the change. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in a similar situation. Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Every gesture you make inspires us to continue creating profound and real stories every day. And don't leave yet, our next powerful story is about to appear on your screen. You can click on the links you see on your screen right now. They're part of an exclusive selection of captivating stories created just for you. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next video.